Well, good morning and welcome to all of you, and thank you all for being here to testify, and thank you all for coming to listen, and thank the members for being here today, participate in today's hearing. So today's hearing is on new federal maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program. Someone apparently thought naming a program MIECHV made sense. But fortunately, at least we have the pronunciation of this acronym, and it's relatively simple, McV program, so I'm going to stick with that if you guys don't mind. At its core, this program is designed to improve outcomes for children and families who face the greatest risk for abuse and neglect and a host of other problems that place too many kids far behind on the road of life. Small home visiting programs have operated for decades using a mix of federal, state, and private funds. But the McV program, when it was created in 2010, marked the first time there was dedicated federal funding for this purpose. Our purpose today is to review what we know about the effects of this program so we can begin thinking about next steps. Earlier this week, we got a little more time with the program's extension through March 2015. But there's not a lot to consider. There is a lot to consider here, so it's good that we have a head start. For instance, we need to review whether the actual outcomes of this program are living up to its promise in terms of producing better outcomes for children and families. We also need to think about whether the program's mix of supporting proven and promising approaches continues to make sense. And we should consider whether this program should continue to have 100% federal funding, especially since some of the positive outcomes we hope to see will benefit our state partners. For my part, I'm interested in how we can apply the basic discipline of this program, which uses taxpayer funds to support what we know works to help children and families. Two other government programs that today can't say the same thing. Unfortunately, we have a distinguished set of experts to help us sort through these questions more thoroughly today. And that list includes a service provider and recipient of home visitation services from my home state of Washington. So we'll have an opportunity to ask some real, how does this work at ground level questions. We welcome all of our witnesses today, and we look forward to their testimony. Mr. Doggett, would you care to make an opening statement?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I share the objectives that you just outlined. We have heard so much over the last several years in this subcommittee about the extent of maltreatment and abuse of children across the country, and the need to focus more of our resources not just on responding to that abuse after it's occurred, but what can we do to prevent maltreatment. The enactment of this federal home visiting program, building on the experience of many local and state initiatives that were already existing back in 2010, I think was an important step forward. It is an investment in prevention and future development of children. I believe there is considerable evidence that this is a wise investment, though, as some of our witnesses point out, it may be difficult to quantify all aspects of the benefits, and this cannot be a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, because these are families with children in different kinds of positions, and we need to adapt the program and look for the most cost-effective way to reach the largest number of children. It's not surprising that a group representing some 5,000 law enforcement officers around the country, Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, has recognized that if you have good home visiting programs, they'll need to visit as law enforcement officers fewer homes and other places where violence or crime occurs. The decision last week of the House to continue this program on a temporary extension of another year of funding into next spring represents some progress. I think we need a little more certainty than going from year to year or 6 months to 6 months. There has been good benefit from this program in the state of Texas, in both the city of San Antonio and in the city of Austin and the surrounding areas. There have been programs that have benefited from the Nurse-Family Partnership, and there has been investment from the state of Texas that's been important. Between really just over the 3 years of McV, the state of Texas has received about $50 million, a significant amount of money, but perhaps not that significant compared to the needs that exist there. The money has not been spent in a vacuum. The state has worked to try to build a network of high-quality programs and to invest some of its own money in these programs. The division of monies in McV so that some of it is focused on evidence-based, most of it is focused on evidence-based programs. Important that we have evidence-based programs, but that we also continue to look at a few programs that are new and innovative so that we can assure that we're pursuing every alternative that would be cost-efficient in this area. Mr. Chairman, I've explained to the witnesses that at the same time this hearing is taking place, the House Budget Committee is marking up a resolution that I really think would threaten the continuation of home visiting, child abuse services generally, and a wide range of social services. So we will be having recurrent votes this afternoon there, and I'll be in and out with no disrespect to our very diverse and experienced panel so that we raise appropriate issues in the course of the budget resolution, and I thank you and yield back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Doggett. And without objection, each member will have the opportunity to submit a written statement and have it included in the record at this point. And I want to remind our witnesses to please try and limit their oral testimony to 5 minutes. All of your testimony will be included in the record. Our panel this afternoon is made up of 5 folks, as everyone can see, and our first witness this afternoon is Crystal Town, RN, Nurse Family Partnership Home Visitor, Yakima Valley Memorial Hospital. Welcome. Shireen Susia, a former Nurse Family Partnership Program participant. Darcy Lowell, CEO of Child First. John Barron, President, Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy. And Rebecca Kilburn, Senior Economist, RAND Corporation. Welcome to all of you. And Ms. Town, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Doggett, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of the Nurse Family Partnership Program in support of evidence-based home visiting. I am Crystal Town, and I am a nurse home visitor for Yakima Valley Memorial Hospital in Yakima County and have been a nurse home visitor since 2003. I am here with one of my former clients, Shireen Susia, who graduated from the Nurse Family Partnership Program 2 years ago and is a wonderful example of how this innovative program can empower young mothers to succeed. I am here in support of the McV program, which is currently serving 80,000 families nationwide, including our Yakima County NFP program. In Washington, NFP is one of several home visiting models offered as part of a continuum of services that are supported at the state level. A higher percentage of preterm and low birth weight babies, an agriculturally driven economy, low high school graduation rates, and high activity, gang activity, in the area make NFP a critical element of the county's continuum of services. As a nurse home visitor, I work with first-time low-income mothers and their families over the course of a little over 2 years. I visit each client in their homes approximately every other week, and I have a caseload of no more than 25 clients at one time. These visits begin early in pregnancy and last until the child's 2nd birthday. Through these, I empower each client to have a healthy pregnancy, improve her child's health and development, and set goals to achieve economic self-sufficiency. I do this by meeting the mom where she is at the time, not where I would like her to be. In NFP, we call this a client-centered approach. The NFP curriculum guides us to talk about the right issues at the right time, such as how can I stay healthy in pregnancy? What do I do when I'm stressed out? How can I set goals for my life? Breastfeeding and infant attachment. The trust I build with my clients begins the moment I walk through their door for the first time. Sometimes my initial visit is filled with laughter and joy, but oftentimes, when serving a young client especially, it is filled with great insecurity. The things that I hear most often are, my parents are so angry with me. My boyfriend is no longer there for me. My friends don't understand why I won't go out to parties anymore. I am so lonely. I listened to their story for the next 2.5 years, building on our trusting relationship. I listened to clients who experience mental illness, intimate partner violence, substance abuse, living in poverty, lack of family support, and health disparities. Shireen is one of hundreds of stories I have had the honor to hear. She is a truly amazing woman, and I am so proud to have the opportunity to have been her nurse, her counselor, her life coach, her confidant, her support system, and most importantly, I am her friend. Every client's story is unique, but since she is here with me today, I would like to share my experience as Shireen's home visiting nurse. On May 6, 2010, I knocked on her front door for the first time. I did not know much about her, only that she was 10 weeks pregnant and she had been in several foster care homes throughout her youth. During our first encounter, I wanted to ask her several questions, but I did not. I listened. I wondered how a young woman could appear so happy and speak about her goals for her future and her hopes and dreams, but have several scars on her arms. We never have talked about those scars. It didn't need to be said. I recognize that Shireen's smile didn't always come easily, but despite her past and future challenges, Shireen is a truly resilient woman who has the hope and the drive to provide a better life for her child. Since we have ended the program 2 years later, today Shireen has a job she loves. She is self-sufficient. She is living in a wonderful home, and she is actively involved in her son's life. She has not given up on continuing her dream for continuing her education, but sometimes being a great parent means postponing some of those personal goals. In closing, NFP applauds the subcommittee and the larger body of Congress for support of the McBee program. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify before you today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Ms. Townend. We applaud you for your hard work, and we know that you can't do this work without becoming a friend to those that you help. And thank you for having the heart of a servant.
Thank
Miss,
you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ms. Town. Ms. Sucia, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Doggett, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Nurse Family Partnership Program in support of evidence-based home visiting and the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. My name is Shireen Sucia, and I was a client with the Nurse Family Partnership Program delivered by the Yakima Valley Memorial Hospital in Yakima, Washington, and I am the incredibly proud mother of my son Andrew, who is now 4 years old. As a client, I received regular visits about every other week from my NFP nurse home visitor, Crystal Town, starting when I was just a couple of months pregnant through my son's 2nd birthday. I am here on behalf of the mothers like me, the children like my son Andrew, and families like our own in support of home visiting. I am honored to be here today to get to thank you all in person for your commitment to improving the health and well-being of children and dedicated funding for evidence home-based visiting programs. This program has meant so much to me and my family, and I know that if every mom could be here today to share their experience with you, they would be, because it really is a changing experience to be here, to be in this program, excuse me. I grew up in Yakima, Washington. When I was 12 years old, I went into foster care and remained there through my 18th birthday. In those 6 years, I attended 7 high schools, which made it very difficult to graduate on time because I didn't go to school in the same district, so the credits didn't transfer properly. But I did graduate on time through a lot of hard work. While being in foster care isn't an experience I would wish on any child growing up, I would say that that experience has shaped who I am today. When I was younger, my mom wasn't really a mom. I didn't really have a role model for parenting, and so when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't have anything to go off of, and I was really scared, and I was in this by myself. I heard about the Nurse Family Partnership Program through my doctor's office when I found out I was pregnant. Because I was a first-time mom and I met other eligibility requirements, they referred me to the Yakima Valley Memorial Hospital NFP's program in Crystal. We set up an appointment for Crystal to come to my home and talk more about the program. After our first meeting, I knew that this was the right program for me, and I looked forward to our regular home visits. At that point, I was new to everything when it came to parenting, but Crystal was a huge help to me and my family. She helped me build confidence and open doors for me to set goals for my life, for myself. But Crystal would bring a scale, and we would weigh Andrew every week, and she reassured me that he was getting what he needed to grow well and according to schedule. That was the first major moment for me where I felt like I was doing a good job, that I was a good mother, and that I was getting him what he needed. And now at 4 years old, I can laugh and say that he is the tallest kid in his class. I was also nervous about his development. Like every parent, you want to make sure that your baby, your child, is keeping up with different milestones, and I didn't know how to assess that. But Krista would bring in questionnaires called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, or ASQ, to assess his development at different points in time, and we would know that his development was on track. I remember throughout the program, Krista would say to me that my son Andrew was a very caring person from a very young age. He was about 13 months when Crystal first commented on how sweet he was. He would give Crystal a hug and actually pat her on the back. At the end of each visit, she would leave a form with lots of different feedback, including highlights from that visit, what our next visit would be about, and what I needed to do before our next visit. Looking back at one of the forums, Crystal mentioned how I was raising such a sweet and loving child, that his hugs and pats melted her heart. Krista was able to point out to me these different signs he was showing of being a very caring human being, even when he was just a toddler. And I remember realizing that if I was raising a son that loving, I really was doing something right as a parent. When I found out I was pregnant, I worked at a barbecue stand. When Crystal and I started talking about my future, she helped me look into going back to school. Ultimately, I ended up getting a job and a great career through steps I took when Andrew was younger. I now work in accounts payable for a local heating and air conditioning company, and I've been there for about 1.5 years. And I have a great job security, as I am the only one in the office doing what I do. It's been really special and wonderful to look back at all the records that I have while in this program. I have a big binder of all the work, the pictures, and the activities that we did. And it's lovely. I can go back and read all my thoughts and feelings from the beginning of my pregnancy to his age of 2 when he turned 2. And that's really special for us now that he's 4. We can go back and look at everything. I really hope that Congress will continue supporting the McVie program, which supports great programs like NFP. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today.
Great job. Is this your first time testifying in
Yes.
front of Congress? You didn't even come across nervous.
I'm sweating.
You sure? So are we. Future Congresswoman sitting there, I think. You know, I just have to make this comment. You did a wonderful job in Misstown. You did a wonderful job also, and I know it's not easy to come before Congress and testify, but the people up here are just regular people. We just have me sitting in these chairs, elected by the folks that we represent, but we all come from backgrounds that you might be surprised to hear about. It's not always, you know, I grew up in a home, ran away from home, domestic violence, and I never became a foster child. And by the way, we're working on some foster care legislation that can help kids stay in school and have those records follow, and hopefully stay in one foster home, and hopefully, more than anything, get adopted and have a family they can call their own. So we're working on all of that, and I'm sorry you had to go through that, but that just fits into everything that this committee is trying to accomplish, and you're an all-star as far as we're concerned.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Lowe, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Microphone?
Good. Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Darcy Lowell, and I'm honored to be here to talk to you today. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of Child First Home Visiting and the McV program. And thank you so much for your vote on the McV extension. It is so needed. I'm a developmental and behavioral pediatrician and the founder and CEO of Child First. I also serve as an associate clinical professor at Yale University School of Medicine. Early in my career, I saw the struggles of vulnerable children and families firsthand as they tried to cope with trauma and depression, homelessness, and hunger. We needed to think about intervention in a very different way, and so Child First began. I want to give you a feeling for the kinds of families that we work so closely with and that we serve. And here's a little vignette about one of them. The Child First mental health clinician met a mother at a pediatric visit for her 3-year-old daughter, Maria. The mother was severely depressed. She had run from her husband because of ongoing domestic violence. She and her 3 children lived in an empty apartment without beds or a kitchen table. Little Maria was about to be expelled from childcare for aggressive behavior. Mom worked 3 jobs, but was still way behind in her rent payments, and the family was about to be evicted. She was desperately afraid that she would lose her children to foster care. The care coordinator learned from the family that they had been on TANF, but Mom was no longer receiving a check. She, the care coordinator, immediately contacted the Department of Social Services and found out that the check was being sent to her husband in prison. In less than a week, the check was redirected to the mother. The family situation improved dramatically. Mom now only needed to work 1 daytime job and was able to focus on her children. The clinician worked psychotherapeutically with Mom and Maria together and also consulted in the preschool. Maria's behavior improved markedly. Mom's depression lifted. The care coordinator coached Mom as she worked out a schedule and the landlord to pay back rent. The life course of this family changed dramatically. What we know is scientific research on early brain development has clearly demonstrated that growing up with stresses of poverty, violence, depression, substance abuse, and homelessness produce a rise in stress hormones and other metabolic chemicals that can severely damage the developing brain and other body systems. This may lead to academic failure, serious mental health problems, and chronic disease, including heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. However, it is now scientifically documented that the presence of a secure, safe, nurturing relationship between a parent and a young child is able to protect the developing brain from damage. We must, therefore, provide intensive intervention at the earliest possible time. Child First works with the most challenged families, targeting young children under the age of 6 who suffer from behavioral and developmental problems and abuse and neglect. We take a 2-pronged approach based on what we now know, what the scientific literature tells us, with a team of 2 professionals working in the home. First, we must decrease the enormous stress in the environment and help stabilize families. Our care coordinators work with our parents to connect them to comprehensive community-based services and supports like medical services, safe housing, early education, and literacy. Through this process, our care coordinators build the capacity of our parents and help them to build internal organizational skills that enable them to be successful as parents and workers. Second, we build the nurturing, responsive parent-child relationship because that is what protects the developing brain, even in the face of adversity. Our mental health clinicians use child-parent psychotherapy to heal these 2 generations while they help parents promote safe environments for their children to grow and develop, which makes them so ready for school. To evaluate our model, we conducted a randomized control trial with strong positive results in child language, behavior, maternal mental health, decreased involvement with Child Protective Services. And with replication, we've been able to actually have even better results, with 89% of our families improving in at least one major area. Child First has only the capacity at this time to serve 1,000 children each year in Connecticut, but we know the need is enormous. We have done this through a public-private partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, especially, and our Department of Children and Families. McVie has been instrumental in allowing us to move to 8 new cities. This support is so essential. The return on investment is substantial, and though I have no time to tell you about it now, I will say that Child First only costs $7,000 a year, and if you have psychiatric hospitalization for just 3 months for one child, it's $130,000 a year. There is major savings in multiple sectors. I thank the committee most sincerely for your interest and efforts in support of the McVie Home Visiting Program in serving vulnerable children and families. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Mr. Barron.
Thank you, Chairman Reichert, members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify about McVie on behalf of the Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy. The Coalition is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that has no affiliation with any programs or program models, and we have no financial interest in any of the policy ideas that we support. We strongly support reauthorization of McVie. McVie represents an important new and bipartisan approach to social spending in that it uses scientific evidence of effectiveness as a central factor in determining which activities to fund. As a result of this evidence-based approach, McVie is funding the large-scale implementation of some home visiting program models that, as I'll discuss in a moment, have been rigorously demonstrated to produce major long-term improvement in the life outcomes of at-risk children and mothers. McVie's evidence-based approach is bipartisan in origin. The Bush administration's 2000 pilot, for example, directed HHS to, quote, ensure that states use the funds to support home visiting program models that have been shown in well-designed randomized controlled trials to produce sizable, sustained effects on important child outcomes such as abuse and neglect. Randomized trials are considered the most rigorous evaluation method. Similarly, the full McVie program implemented under the Obama administration directs HHS to allocate at least 75% of the program's funds to, quote, evidence-based home visiting models and uses a slightly different but still rigorous standard to determine what qualifies as evidence-based. Why does this matter? Because rigorous studies have found great variation in the effectiveness of different home visiting program models. At one end of the spectrum, for example, is the Nurse-Family Partnership, which provides nurse home visitation services to low-income first-time mothers. This model has been shown in 3 well-conducted randomized trials to produce major long-term improvements in participants' life outcomes, such as a 20 to 50% decrease in child maltreatment and hospitalizations, an 8% increase in 8% higher grade point average through elementary school for the most at-risk children, and in one trial, a $13,000 reduction in families' use of welfare, food stamps, and Medicaid that more than offset the program's cost. At the other end of the effectiveness spectrum, for example, is the Comprehensive Child Development Program, which was a 1990s HHS home visiting program in which trained paraprofessionals provided home visits to families with young children, designed to teach parenting skills and connect families with community services. This was a well-intentioned and a well-implemented program. But when evaluated in a rigorous randomized trial, it unfortunately was found to produce no effects on any of the hoped-for outcomes, including children's cognitive and social development, child health, and parents' economic self-sufficiency. More generally, 2 recent impartial reviews that examined which home visiting models had rigorous evidence of policy-important impacts on child maltreatment and other key outcomes found several models to be effective or promising, including the 2 that we've heard from today, but a larger number to produce no meaningful effects. That pattern is not unique to home visitation. In almost every field in which rigorous trials are conducted, including medicine, business, and K-12 education, the effective interventions are almost always found to be outnumbered by interventions producing weak or no impacts. What this means is that if McVie were to allocate funds the usual way, without regard to rigorous evidence, it would primarily be funding program models that produce no meaningful impacts and might miss the opportunity to scale up the few effective models that can improve people's lives in an important way. As I describe in my written testimony, McVie's evidence-based design has succeeded in part in focusing funds on the subset of effective models and, for example, is funding national implementation of the Nurse-Family Partnership, as well as the scale-up of other effective evidence-based models like Child First. We believe this is a very important achievement. We also suggest a modest legislative revision in my written remarks to close a loophole that has allowed some of McVie's funding to go toward ineffective models. I'd be happy to discuss this further if of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Ms. Kilburn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Reichert, Member Doggett, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the McVie program. My name is Rebecca Kilburn, and I'm a senior economist at the RAND Corporation. My testimony will draw upon a 15-year program of research performed at RAND by me and my colleagues. We're here today to discuss what we know about whether the McVie program improves outcomes for children and their parents. The federal government has sponsored a rigorous study of the effects of McVie, but initial findings from that study will not be available until next year. Absent the results of that study, today I will describe currently available research that informs McVie. I'm going to discuss 2 ways that existing research findings inform McVie. First, I'm going to describe research related to the rationale for McVie, and second, I'm going to make recommendations regarding research-supported features of McVie that raise the likelihood of it achieving its desired objectives. First, as you've heard, rigorous evaluations have demonstrated that a diverse set of home visiting models can improve a spectrum of outcomes for children and parents. Programs have been able to improve outcomes in the short run and the long run, and some, but not all, evidence-based programs have found that programs generate government savings that more than outweigh the cost. In other words, a growing research base has identified evidence-based home visiting models and supports the theory of change underlying McVie, that scaling up home visiting to large numbers of at-risk families has the potential to improve outcomes for children and parents, improve population-level outcomes, such as reducing rates of low birth weight or child maltreatment, and these in turn should save government money in the long run. The primary contribution of McVie is to test the idea that broadly scaling up home visiting can transform our approach to human services. Having a research-supported rationale does not imply that an initiative will necessarily be effective. The initiative must be well-structured and well-implemented. I will now discuss design features of McVie that research indicates will raise the likelihood of it improving outcomes for at-risk families. Lawmakers should preserve these 3 existing features of McVie. First, continuing to concentrate McVie funding on evidence-based models will make the chances greater that McVie funds will have their intended impact. Second, drawbacks to funding exclusively evidence-based models are that it could stifle innovation and prevent us from discovering models that may be effective but have not been evaluated. A second feature to preserve are mechanisms in McVie that circumvent these drawbacks. One is allowing 25% of the funding to be used for promising models that are being evaluated, and the other is funding the McVie competitive development grants, which allow states to apply for funding to pilot test and evaluate innovations in home visiting. Third, in order to achieve the best outcomes for children and families, it is not only necessary to deliver programs that work, but it is also necessary to implement them well. The third feature of McVie that should be preserved is the implementation supports it provides states and other grantees. These include training and professional development, plus technical assistance that help states engage in best practices in evidence-based program implementation. These best practices include conducting needs assessments, identifying goals, collecting and reporting outcome data, and engaging in continuous quality improvement. At the same time that the federal home visiting program has expanded, states have also been increasing their funding for home visiting. The McV program is partnering with states to build state home visiting infrastructure, with the McV program leading the drive to integrate best practices into home visiting implementation. To conclude, there are also a couple of ways that McV could be strengthened to further raise the chances of achieving the best outcomes for children and families. One is that while 25% of McV funds can be used to deliver promising home visiting models, McV currently does not support a path by which potentially effective models could undergo evaluation that would lead them to be designated as evidence-based. The types of evaluations that the McV evidence standards require often cost upwards of $1 million, representing a substantial barrier to discovering the next evidence-based model. Second, McV can better harness the power of performance-based accountability, which links performance measures to funding or targeted technical assistance. McV currently requires states to collect benchmarks related to family outcomes, which is a cutting-edge aspect of the program. While monitoring outcomes is desirable, there may be opportunities to better monitor states' organizational performance, such as number of families served, and importantly, for McV to more closely link performance measures to consequences or targeted support to generate improvement. Thank you for allowing me to appear before you today, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Kilburn. Thank you all for your testimony, and we're going to go into the question phase now, so we'll just ask a few questions. It'll be easy. Don't worry about it. So I was a police officer for 33 years before I came to Congress, so I just look like I've been here for 40 years, but I've only been here 9. So, I got phone calls this past week from sheriffs and police chiefs from Washington State, very much supportive of fight crime, invest in kids. We get it because we know if we put the money up front, we're going to be saving a lot of money at the back end. And that's a hard thing, though, for people who legislate to really see the long-term goal here. You all see it very clearly. But we've heard about evidence-based scientific, I think Mr. Barron used it, scientific evidence and effectiveness to decide which programs to fund. And Ms. Kilburn, you talked about design features, and 3 points that you made about evidence-based models and funding for evaluation and implementation of supporting programs. And what I want to try and do is to tie together what you do with what's happening where, as cops would say, where the rubber meets the road, where Ms. Town and Ms. Sucia are. And you know what, because you may have never heard about implementation supports and things like that, where, no, I didn't think so. So, I mean, you're down here doing the work. How does, so this is for both of you, how does what you're doing, what you're going through, how does that get filtered up to the folks that are making those decisions and trying to figure out what is working and what's not working? What worked in, so just real quickly, what worked in your case? What was the you know, you touched on some of it.
Sorry, I'm trying to understand the question, I guess.
So you're working with Ms. Town.
Yes.
And the programs that you got involved in that she helped direct you to, what were those programs that you saw that really kind of a light bulb went on as to this really is going to work? This program works, or that program, if you got sidetracked into a program that you thought, boy, this isn't going to work at all. You can help her if you want to.
Are you asking about perhaps she participated in programs in addition to nurse-family partnership?
Yeah, I mean, anything that so she finally comes to you and you give her places where she's going and it's working. How does that get communicated to the administrators who are making some decisions as to, you know, what programs work, what programs don't work? Mm-hmm. It's evidence-based, right? So
Correct.
how does that evidence get moved up to, filtered up to?
Okay, so you're asking specifically about the data?
Yes.
Is that, okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. At visits at various time periods that are structured by the program, so for instance, in pregnancy, at 36 weeks, at birth, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, we collect data from Shireen in the form of various questions that are then submitted to the University of Colorado for research purposes.
Okay.
Is that what you're
Sure.
asking? Yes. As part of the curriculum and part of the model for nurse-family partnership, they have outlined very specific questions and data they are collecting at different times throughout that 2.5-year period.
Okay.
And it is handled through the University of Colorado.
Do you ever feel like you're working in an area where, with a program that's not working, and you're able to give feedback, data to Denver, that this isn't really working at the, you know, where the rubber meets the road, sort of a? No.
I don't see that as a home visitor, because the beauty of the nurse-family partnership program, again, is that it is client-centered. So it's not necessarily myself dictating what we discuss throughout each visit. It's really looking at the guidelines of suggested topics, but allowing Shireen to choose what she feels would be most helpful.
Okay, that you just hit on the answer right there. She chooses.
She absolutely.
Yeah.
Every visit, the way it works in my home visiting practice is at the end of every visit, we look at what options are available to discuss at the next visit. And I guess available isn't maybe the right word. First, Shireen can choose, maybe there's something on her mind that's really not a part of the guidelines, and that's okay.
Okay.
But she can also look at the guidelines and topics and choose one of those.
Great. Thank you for your answer. Mr. Davis, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank all of our witnesses. I have been tremendously impressed with all of your testimonies for a number of reasons. And one is that for all of my life, I have been intimately involved with, associated with, know people personally in home visiting. This bipartisan effort drew on research and economic studies documenting that investing in our youngest citizens yields high returns in the form of healthier children and families and taxpayer savings. The voluntary home visiting law was designed as an investment in evidence-based prevention. In Illinois, 30% of children entering out-of-home care for the first time are under the age of 1, slightly higher than the national rate. In Chicago, roughly half of those babies enter before they are 3 months old. This pattern is generally true nationwide. These statistics put into context the importance of home visiting, which focuses on strengthening children and families by supporting pregnant women and parents with young children. The role of home visiting is particularly important given the recent study reported in JAMA, that is the Journal of the American Medical Association, about an increase in infants' death, potentially due to the economy. Supporting young children and families is critical to preventing harm and strengthening children. Mr. Chairman, I've got 2 documents I'd like to submit for the record.
Without objection.
I also, well, let me ask you, Ms. Kilborn. You mentioned in your testimony that studies that the federal government had a study under the way, and the data has not all been collated and put together, and so there's not a report yet. But without that report, would you say that home visiting is really an effective way of helping to strengthen and prepare children and their families that ultimately will provide them with healthier lives and even save our taxpayers a great deal of money?
There is a strong research base that supports the idea that these individual programs can improve outcomes for children and families. What McVie adds to that is allowing us for the first time to test the concept of scaling that up on a large basis in order to see if we can capture those effects that were found in individual programs at a community or city or state level. So there's a lot of evidence to support the basic idea behind McVie, and now we're really testing, can it achieve this transformation in the way we deliver human services to, instead of treating things after the fact, to prevent them. And so there's a large research basis that supports that idea, and we're really testing it right now.
And I guess the reason I said that for all of my life I've been associated, I've lived in low-income communities all of my life growing up, and of course even today. I used to train community health aides basically to do home visiting and basically to make assessments of the health needs of individuals in the community who oftentimes would not come to the clinics unless they had been prompted a little bit, prodded a little bit. And I know that there have been people who've said that these programs are unnecessary, that they don't really work, or if they do, let the local governments and the state governments provide the resources. Are you aware that the federal government, based upon your research, has been very instrumental in making these programs work and work effectively?
I don't think we have research evidence on McVie per se, but what McVie is doing is providing the data for us to answer that question. We don't have that right now, but the study underway will provide insights into that. The important that federal government does this is that while the individual states have been increasing their investments in home visiting, it hasn't been in a systematic way that supports evidence-based programming, that provides infrastructure support to implement programs well using evidence-based practices and implementation. And so, experiments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, let me just thank you on assembling one of the most outstanding panels I think that I've heard testify on this matter. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you to the staff. Mr. Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and I agree with Mr. Davis. This is a good panel to have before us. One of the things that I've been wondering about, and of course it seems to me that the home visits are critical if we're going to continue to support families. And I think one of the things that we've seen in our culture that's causing a greater problem is the fact that the nuclear family is now not at the same level it used to be. Now, some of these programs are working, and there's a lot of areas that they're not working. What can we do to change that? Mr. Barron and Ms. Kilburn, you both had testimony towards that. So how do we look at a good return on the investment for the American taxpayers, that we actually make a difference in these people's lives? Ms. Cecilia, I really applaud you for what you've been able to do. But that's an example of the success of it. So tell me, what else could we do? What programs aren't working, and how would we redirect or redeploy those dollars to make sure that there's a better return on it, not just for the taxpayers, but also for the people that we're spending the time with?
Well, first, for some of the more effective models, like the nurse-family partnership, one of the things that they did was they measured sort of long-term impacts for both the people who got the program group, and a control group of families that did not get the program. They measured their use of public assistance over a 12-year period, and found that the savings, program savings, more than offset the savings in their use of public assistance more than offset the initial program cost. So at least for that model, there was strong evidence not only of improvement in people's lives, but savings to the taxpayer. But there is, within the program funds, as I mentioned, a diversity of home visiting models, many of which have been found in rigorous studies, or some of which have been found in rigorous studies not to be as effective. One of the things that could be done to shift within this program fund to more effectively focus it on programs that really make a difference in people's lives is to slightly change the evidence, make a modest but important revision in the evidence standard. Right now, the evidence standard for evidence-based is that the program model produces statistically significant effects. But it does not ask whether those effects are of policy or practical importance, like reduced use of public assistance or reduced child maltreatment rates. That has opened a loophole in the program, a modest loophole, allowing several models to qualify as evidence-based solely on the basis of statistically significant effects on outcomes that may not be particularly important, or effects that may be tiny in magnitude.
Okay, but so as you look at this, now you have data that you can look at across the board of different programs.
Yes.
You have the ability then to look at which ones are working and which ones aren't working. And I would just think that when you look at that and you're looking for a really good return on the investment, we're talking about building a stronger society. And you only can do it through building stronger families, which will result in stronger communities and a stronger country. So when you look at these, then how do you separate one from the other and say, you know, this is one that we see working. These other ones aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Ms. Town and Ms. Silla talked about how that one worked for them. And I would just tell you, being a grandfather and having 8 grandchildren and 2 more on the way, I've seen what can happen with families that are very supportive and they get help from the outside. So you have the ability to do this. So you can actually compare programs and say, this one works, this one is not working the way it should, and you can redeploy those dollars. That's the effort that you're trying to do. Is that not correct?
Yes, a straightforward way to do it, which is used in many different areas now, increasingly in social spending as well as in medicine. A program like this generally does not have enough money to serve every family that it can. So one thing that is sometimes done is to do a randomized controlled trial where you use a lottery, meaning random assignment, to allocate some families to receive the program, and other families, an equivalent set, they get access to the usual services in the community. And then you track outcomes, important outcomes over time, like rates of child maltreatment for one group versus the other group, families' use of public assistance in one group versus the other group, and the outcomes there will tell you which program, in a scientifically valid way.
Are you able to share that information back and forth then, and actually, come up with a change then, and actually look at this as the best? This is the best way to spend those dollars. We can only spend $1 once, so you want to make sure it's spent the right way. So to get the most mileage out of it, you can actually share that data and improve these programs.
That can be shared, and in fact, McVie does that. It looks at that data, and it allocates. The grants are made on the basis of evidence as one of the main selection criteria, that kind of evidence. There are ways in which that evidence criterion can be strengthened, but in general, the program allocates funds naturally based on that data we were just talking about.
Okay, all right. Thank you. And just to finish, so we can redeploy these dollars the right way after we've looked at this evidence that's conclusive, and you say, listen, we don't need to spend money over here. This program is not coming up with the results that we need, and we can redeploy. That's my main concern, because I think too often we continue to spend money on programs that aren't effective, and we say, well, why do we do this? It's because we've always done that. That's not the answer. the answer is to change it so it benefits families more.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's one of the unique features of this program, as opposed to the way social spending is often done, social programs are often done, that money is allocated on the basis of evidence. So if new findings come in showing a particular model is effective or a particular model is not effective, the funding is naturally, through the grant-making process, allocated toward the more effective models.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I think that's the question I was asking too. Mr. Kelly and I were going at it at different angles, is how the information is shared, programs are changed so that they fit what the star of our show today needs. So, Mr. Renacci, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I want to thank you, Chairman Reichert, for holding this hearing, highlighting the importance of using evidence brand models to home visiting programs. And I also want to thank the witnesses. This is a great panel of witnesses. In my home state of Ohio, an estimated 1.8 million Ohioans are living below the poverty line. Poverty has increased by approximately 58% over the last decade, despite a stagnant population and a whole host of federal programs created to end the cycle of poverty. So I'm glad we are here today to discuss policies that work. Ohio's rate of infant mortality is also ranked the 11th worst in the nation, averaging 7.7 deaths per 1,000 births in the first year of life. In fact, according to a study conducted by researchers at Case Western Reserve University, infant mortality exceeds some third world countries in certain neighborhoods surrounding the University Circle area in Cleveland. While I applaud the efforts of home visiting programs that have been proven to improve the safety and well-being of infants and children, we as a nation cannot continue to financially support ineffective programs. As a small business owner, when I implemented a particular program, I also wanted to ensure that the procedures that I created were effective in really meeting certain goals that I created for those employees. Businesses and my business actually measured our programs and used evidence-based models in order to guarantee success. And I think the federal government should be no different. As a member of Congress, I want to protect taxpayer dollars from going toward ineffective programs and redirect them toward programs that do what is intended and lift individuals out of poverty. I really hope together with my friends across the aisle that we can determine what works, what doesn't work, and can make so that government can finally empower individuals to become independent and self-sufficient. Mrs. Town and Mrs. Lowell, both of your programs have been shown to increase the safety and well-being of young children. For example, I know families who have gone through the Nurse Family Partnership Program have been shown to have fewer child injuries, fewer emergency room visits, and less reported child abuse and neglect. Families participating in Child First also are less likely to be involved with Child Protective Services even after 3 years. Both of your organizations have had some successes. What do you think are some specific factors that have led to these outcomes or successes? I'll start with you, Mrs. Town.
Could you repeat the last part of your question, please?
Yeah, what do you think are some of the specific factors that have led to these outcomes or successes for both of your programs?
That's a complex question. I would say that there are many factors of the Nurse-Family Partnership model that have led to success. From a home visiting point of view, I believe that it is the length of time and the intensity of the program that allows me to continue to support a family for 2.5 years in developing a strong infant bond, a stronger family unit than when our relationship had started, is part of what helps.
So you're zeroing in on the 2.5 years and making sure the program, you feel pretty strongly about the 2.5-year time frame.
I feel pretty strongly that a larger length period of time, along with the intensity of the visits, we are looking at approximately 2 hours per visit every other week, allows quite a bit of time for growth.
Mrs. Lowell, do you have any?
Yeah. Yes, I think that for us, there are a number of factors. One is the intensity of the training for our staff. We are working with both bachelor's level care coordinators and master's licensed clinicians as our mental health clinicians who go in the home. And we have a training period that lasts a year's time, and not before they can start. They start after an intensive 2-week training, but we both have what's called a learning collaborative, which lasts a year's time, and we have our senior clinical consultants working with each new site on a weekly basis. So we are really looking at, do you have fidelity to the model? Do you really understand what the work is about, and are you doing it well? And we also look at both implementation measures in an ongoing way every single month, and we also look at outcomes at baseline 6 months and at discharge. So we're able to say, do we have a problem here? Are the people who are implementing this model doing it really well? Are they doing it according to the model fidelity, which I think is essential? The other really important piece about the work itself is it is built on relationships and on building relationships. And I think that at least when you talk about the families that we serve, which are the most vulnerable, they're the ones who have had abuse and neglect, domestic violence, homelessness, substance use. These are really difficult families. They don't trust easily, and they are not very willing to let new people into their lives. And it takes time to build that relationship, but when you have built that relationship of trust, you are able, and these are families who want to do the right thing. They want to do the best for their children. They're there, but they have to, it's a process. And so if you can build that relationship and work with both the parent or caregiver and the child therapeutically to understand what are the barriers, what are the problems, it's not so simple. We can't just teach them things because that's not enough. They don't learn those things. It has to be at a deeper level. And I think for us, with our families, we're so successful with them because we do go to that deeper level and make sure they're doing it correctly. One other really important thing I have to say is I think that, as was said, that our home visiting models are different and they target different outcomes. And it's really important for us to be matching the outcome that the family needs and wants with the kind of program that they're getting. And I think that we have problems when we have a mismatch there. When we have a very vulnerable family, a mom who's running from domestic violence, who's severely depressed, and someone who is just going to be teaching them things when the mom is not available to learn them. So I think that other moms, that's a perfect match for them. So we need this continuum of models to work together in a system if we're really going to be effective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was, we're 2 minutes over time, but that was so passionate, there was no way I was going to interrupt. It was a great answer. Mr. Doggett, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lowell, you described in your testimony the need here as enormous. What will be the impact in your area if the federal funding through McV is not continued beyond next spring?
Thank you. That's a really important question. We have, with our McV funding, we have 5 new sites and 3 expansion sites, which cover about 1/3 of our state Child First programs. So if the McV funding is not continued, there is very high likelihood that those programs will be closed. And all of those children and families in those areas will not be served.
And you used in your testimony the comparison between a $7,000 cost and a $30,000 cost from not relying on home visiting to intervene in advance. Would you elaborate on that?
Well, I think that we are seeing, at least we did a preliminary cost-benefit analysis in looking at our data, and we need to do much more. But we know that, for instance, if one of our children many of our children have very severe behavioral problems and mental health problems. If one of those children were to be hospitalized for just 2 months in a psychiatric hospital, it would cost $130,000. We know that we're getting great language outcomes. If they need special education, it's going to cost $16,600. If they go into foster care, and I've heard various kinds of, but we're talking about potentially somewhere between, depending on the numbers I've seen, $20,000 and $80,000 for a child for a year in foster care. And many of our families have multiple children. We just had a family that we just heard about which we just started working with, where mom was going to be evicted. She had 6 children. Our care coordinator got her into a shelter initially and then got her an apartment in a with low-income housing and saved 6 children from going into foster care. And the trauma of foster care is very major because that separation is really difficult, especially if it's not because there's abuse and neglect, but just because the circumstances can't support that parent there. So I also see we are getting outcomes. We have some data on hospitalization and ER visits, which is actually, it's very preliminary, but we're talking about a 4 to 6-fold decrease in hospitalization and in emergency room visits.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for what you're doing there. And Dr. Kilburn, you made reference, of course, to this important study that will come out next year, and the blend that is already in the Act to both permit some innovation, but to ensure that our dollars are well spent with evidence-based programs. Do you believe that that study will allow us to focus on more effective programs, or do you think that the study is something that would lead to the elimination of the federal program entirely?
I think this study will indicate whether this scaling up of the individual programs has been accomplished. So were they able to replicate these programs with fidelity, and can we provide not just the quantity but also the quality? I think it will also indicate whether when you scale the programs up, you replicate the same outcomes. So, you know, it's one thing when Darcy's overseeing Child First very closely, we're pretty confident that we're going to get great results. But when we start having this replicated in other states, and Darcy's not directly involved, for example, you know, can we achieve the same outcome? So we'll provide information of that sort.
You believe in the value of home visiting as a way of preventing abuse and cost. It's a question more of how to do it rather than whether to do it.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Ms. Town, I'm very impressed by both your testimony, but what would be the effect in your area if you lose federal funding?
Unfortunately, as a home visitor, I'm not sure that I could really testify to the answer to that as far as funding resources go. I believe it would have a significant impact to our families in Yakima County.
I think your testimony and yours as well really did bring a very human dimension to the statistics that we frequently throw around here about how this program, this intervention, can really help make a difference in lives. And I look forward to your continued involvement and report to the committee on how we can achieve the very most in using home visiting as a way to prevent abuse and other costs. Thank you so much for the testimony each of you gave.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett. Mr. Griffin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Barron, I wanted to focus a little bit on Hippie USA, which is, although it serves many folks across the country, it is based in Little Rock, which is my district, 2nd Congressional District in Central Arkansas. And Hippie stands for Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters, Hippie USA. So they are operating both in rural and urban areas. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Barron, when you're reviewing your models for effectiveness, are you seeing any differences between the outcomes in rural areas versus urban areas? And if so, what do you attribute those differences to?
It's interesting that there have been evaluations of scientific evaluations of home visiting, randomized trials that have been done in both rural and urban areas. One of the Nurse-Family Partnership studies was done in upstate New York in a rural, primarily white population, and that one was found to have very large effects as long as 15 years after the study began for the treatment compared to the control group. big decreases for the children of the mothers, for instance, in rates of criminal activity and other rates of child maltreatment and so on. But some of the other studies have been done, other good studies, was another nurse-family partnership randomized trial was done in Memphis, Tennessee, and Urban, also found large effects, but different. The effects may vary for a variety of reasons. It might be the women in upstate New York, there was a larger population of smokers than in Memphis. And then the third trial was also done, that was done in Denver, also in an urban population. What was most impressive about those sets of studies was that effects were found across different ethnicities, rural versus urban. They were different effects from the different studies. It could have been because the populations were different.
I think, Ms. Lowell, I think you referred to the fact that different programs or different methods are used to reach different outcomes. Different families have different needs. And I was wondering, and either you, Ms. Lowell, or Mr. Barron, when you look at these different programs, are there some programs or methods that work in certain areas, urban areas, for example, that don't work as well in rural? Have you seen anything that would indicate that, or different parts of the country?
I think that one has to, first of all, it has to do with the uniqueness of each family, and that if you really do a good assessment and you really understand what the needs of that family are, you're going to be the most successful, because you're going to be able to target your intervention specifically to the needs of the family, as you described so beautifully. It's about what that family needs. Now,
and just interrupt there, because, so with each of the different models or programs or methodologies, that flexibility exists. With each of them, they try to take the particular family's circumstances into account, and there's a certain flexibility there.
I think that that each model does it in their own way, but I think that different models have different capabilities. And for instance, in Connecticut, we work in partnership with other home visiting. We have another big home visiting program. And so we often get referrals from that other home visiting program because they have a paraprofessional model. They know if they're working with a mom who's really depressed or one who has, let's say, domestic violence, that they're not really the right model to work with that family. So they will refer them to us, and we will do a very close transfer so that we will then take that family, or a child who's having major behavior problems. So that's but I think that each of us has the same idea that these are very family-focused kinds of interventions. And in that sense, I think that everyone is trying to do that, is really understand who their families are.
So there is some degree of nimbleness, if you will, to allow for tweaks and changes if it sounds like through transfers or what have you, if things aren't working exactly as maybe one thought. And I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Crowley, you're recognized.
Ms. Kilburn, do you want to respond very quickly to that?
Sure. I just wanted to raise one issue that hasn't come up today that I think is relevant, and that is that a constraint for implementing these models is the local workforce, and this is particularly relevant for rural areas. So if you have a program that needs to deploy mental health clinicians or registered nurses, it's the case that many rural areas are designated as health professional shortage areas, and you might have selected one of these great programs and have the will to do it and even have the funding, but you don't have the trained personnel to be able to pull it off. So I think particularly in our rural areas, we're observing that some of these programs have not been selected, and that may be a contributing factor.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Kilburn. Mr. Chairman, reclaim my time. I'm very pleased we're having this hearing here today on an effective evidence-based program that has tremendous social benefits down the road. Being from New York, I have seen the great work of the Nurse Family Partnership and what it does, and I've been so impressed with the results this program has shown over the years. New York City Nurse Family Partnership is the largest urban program of its kind in the country. It has served more than 10,500 clients since its creation in 2003 and currently serving more than 1,700 clients across all 5 boroughs. These dedicated professionals, like Ms. Town, are working with New York City families to make sure they have the education, information, and assistance they need to raise their children and become stronger families. And the long-term results are so impressive, even beyond what you'd expect from the immediate assistance provided. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, if I could, offer into the record the state profile of the Nurse Family Partnership in New York, if I could.
Without objection.
Reductions in child abuse and neglect, better educational outcomes for children, a greater likelihood of economic stability for the mother. These results are not just good for the participants, but also are good for society as a whole. Mr. Barron, I know you were here at a previous hearing this subcommittee held, and we discussed the ripple effect we would see from cutting or eliminating funding for these types of programs. Our budget should focus on long-term priorities, not just short-term impacts. That's why I was so pleased that the Affordable Care Act started this federal investment in home visitation programs, and it is in fact an investment in the future health and well-being of all families in our country. Your testimony references some of the research and evidence-based home visiting programs that shows they can lead to reductions in child abuse and injuries, improvements in educational outcomes for children, and even a reduction in means-tested assistance over the long term for mothers served by the program. It is therefore reasonable to suggest that investment in strong home visiting programs will not only protect and help children, but also yield major benefits to society and ultimately to taxpayers. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's right. This is a case where often there's a claim that you can, if a social program is effective, you can improve people's lives and save money. Very often when a rigorous evaluation is done, the effects are not quite so promising. It doesn't turn out that way. But this is a case where, at least for some of the program models, like the Nurse Family Partnership and perhaps for Child First as well, the more effective ones, it really does look like the evidence shows you can have your cake and eat it too. You can improve people's lives in a very important way over a long period of time and reduce their use of public assistance so that the government and taxpayer benefits as well.
Win-win. I appreciate that. It's clear that this program is making a difference, and we need to maintain that federal support. I was pleased to see the President and his administration have proposed a long-term extension and expansion of this program. That's the kind of investment we should be making. Congress recently passed a short-term extension of this program, but it's clear that more must be done to build upon the success so far. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides. I want to commend the chairman for a very bipartisan approach to this issue as well. I really do appreciate that. I hope that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on this committee will work with us to support this program. And once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding the hearing today.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. And as you can see, and as Mr. Crowley said, this is really, truly a partnership up here with Republicans and Democrats all appearing to be on the same page, wanting to help those that are the most vulnerable. And I really, as an old cop, I know I mention this quite often, but I'm proud to be, an old law enforcement officer, but the evidence-based stuff is very critical, and you guys are doing an awesome job at that, so congratulations. Congratulations to you, Ms. Tasia, and your success, and thank you, Ms. Town, for your hard work that you do each and every day. So we're going to see each other again. We'll visit again and continue to work together. If members have additional questions for the witnesses, they will submit them to you in writing, and we would appreciate receiving your responses for the record within 2 weeks. Committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
In your written testimony, you had that diagram. I think that, did you get that from the HomeV website?
I got it from one of my publications that came out in 2013 and 19.
Because what I was wondering about was, why not check